I am Garrett Graff. I'm a journalist and historian, and I write a newsletter called Doomsday Scenario and host a history podcast called Long Shadow.
Okay, so in the name there, you're really just leaning in. You're
Exactly.
not even pretending that this is going to be a cheerful story.
Yeah.
All right, so first let's just talk about how ICE started, because I understand it as something that was sort of born out of the Department of Homeland Security and 9/11 and that period where we were really, as a nation, like launching new federal agencies.
Yeah, ICE was a creation alongside as part of the Department of Homeland Security right after 9/11. And it brought together two different federal law enforcement agencies. The inspectors of the U.S. Customs Service, which were then part of the Department of Treasury, and that is now a division known as HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, that focuses on drug smugglers, human traffickers, antique smuggling, customs smuggling, nuclear nonproliferation. They do really cool, really complex national security cases. And then the other half of ICE is what used to be known as the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which was part of the Justice Department. And that is now something called ERO, Enforcement and Removal Operations. And when we think of ICE, that's really what we're thinking of, is that half of ICE known as ERO.
Which is ironic because the first thing you described, you're talking about nuclear weapons and drug smuggling. That sounds like the more, muscular version of it.
Yeah.
But you're saying that's not the case. It's got this root in kind of like paperwork people and inspectors.
Exactly. And there's actually this incredible tension within ICE between HSI and ERO, because HSI is sort of much more like the FBI, the ATF, the Secret Service, sort of the federal law enforcement that we normally think of. And those agents want absolutely nothing to do with the immigration side of the house. In most cities, actually, there are separate HSI field offices and ERO offices because they don't even want to share offices. There's so much sort of dislike between the two halves of ICE.
We have this alphabet soup of agencies. The thing I want to underscore for people is that ICE is about to get so much money that it doesn't matter about those other agencies in a way, right? Like it is about to have a bigger budget than just about any other law enforcement agency. Am I describing that right?
Yeah, not just like larger than almost any other federal law enforcement agency, like larger than most of them combined. Like if you took the FBI, the ATF, the Secret Service, and the Marshals, threw in the DEA there, you still wouldn't get to the level of funding that we are now giving to ICE over the next couple of years with this new explosion of funding for immigration enforcement.
I just want to pause. That's wild. Like that's crazy.
It is. And I think one of the things, so, that money comes in a couple of different buckets. It goes to hiring about 10,000 new ICE agents. There's money in there also to hire about 3,000 new Customs and Border Protection officers and agents. That's the Border Patrol. That's the officers at U.S. Border Customs that you're sort of used to in going through airports. And building new detention facilities, building new border infrastructure. So
that's all you're paying for, all your alligator Alcatrazes, right? There's money in there to kind of encourage states to try to make up their own pop-up temporary detention facilities. So you're talking about, when you talk about it being bigger than all the other agencies, you're saying all the money it'll have to do everything it wants, from the officers who pursue people to where they put them. Like the entire system's going to grow.
Yeah. And to put this in like very frank terms, we are giving ICE about as much money as we spend on the U.S. Marines each year.
How much is that?
About $50 billion a year.
Okay, still a lot. I just
Yeah.
needed some sense of scale. Now, here's the thing. We're pouring this money into an agency that is not that old. I mean, ICE was created within my lifetime, that's for sure, if we're talking about post 9/11. How is it measure up as a quote unquote kind of young agency?
Yeah, I think actually a lot of the problems that we are seeing with ICE right now stem from it being a very young agency in the grand scheme of federal institutions. And what I mean by that is this is a agency that, as I was saying, was created after 9/11. It brought together sort of two pre-existing agencies, but has had to build its own culture, its own, sort of sense of self. And, without without relitigating all of the last 20 years of American immigration policy and enforcement, this was an agency that up until, 6 months ago or so was on track towards being sort of an average federal law enforcement agency. This was, it had actually very good directors and leadership in the Obama years. In the weird way of sort of our national mental schism over immigration, Obama actually deported more people using ICE than Bush did.
I was thinking about ICE in the context of other agencies because it's relatively young. If you think about the Justice Department or Secret Service or Treasury, they kind of have histories going pretty far back and cultures that have grown out of various kind of law enforcement periods in our country. This was, in a way, came into its own in just the last couple of years. What makes ICE distinct in its culture?
Yeah. So one of the challenges of ICE on the ERO side, this enforcement, immigration enforcement side, is this was already an agency that had some of the lowest hiring standards, lowest educational standards, and lowest training standards of any federal law enforcement agency, certainly any of the big ones. To give you sort of just a very specific example, to join the FBI, you have to have a college degree. You have to also have professional experience or an advanced degree, a law degree or accounting degree. You have to be at least 23 years old. You have to pass a top secret background check, security clearance check, and then you undergo 5 months of 20 weeks of training. ICE, by comparison, on the ERO side, there is no educational requirement. You only have to pass a secret level, which is a lower level security clearance check. And then you only go through sort of 12 or 13 weeks of academy training before you go into your work on the field. So these are...
So sorry, you said 12 or 13 weeks.
Yes. And so this is an agency that already has some of the lowest standards for its officers in the US government. And what worries me about all of this money that we are throwing at the agency now is that in order to grow at the scale and scope and speed that the Trump administration hopes to grow it,
right, 10,000 new officers.
10,000 new officers, more than doubling the number on the immigration side. They're going to have to do what any agency does when it hires in a surge like that, and lower its hiring standards, lower its training standards, and lower its supervision standards.
Okay, let me stick up for ICE. What makes you think that that's where this is going? Meaning there might be, like right now, military recruiters are having a good time. People are signing up to be in the military. What is the reason why you think this is automatically going to be, in a way, you're implying a lower quality batch of people who may be coming in next?
Yeah. It's a great question, Audie. And the answer is every single agency that has ever tried to do this in the entire history of American criminal justice and American policing. That it's sort of well known in criminal justice and policing worlds that a healthy law enforcement agency cannot grow quickly. And to be clear, and we can spend more time talking about this, ICE is not a healthy law enforcement agency. But when you look at the history, anyone in policing can rattle off the agencies that have tried to grow quickly. Miami in the 1980s, the infamous Metropolitan Police Department class of 1989, when Washington Mayor Marion Barry tried to grow the force by 50% in a single year. Both of those agencies saw enormous waves of criminality, misconduct, and corruption. And then actually, we even have a more recent, very clear example that I spent years reporting on myself when I was at Politico, within DHS, within ICE's sister agency, Customs and Border Protection, where we did a massive hiring surge in the late 2000s under Bush and Obama, doubled the number of Border Patrol agents from about 9,000 to 18,000. And the result was sort of one of the most disruptive waves of corruption and criminality and misconduct we've ever seen in federal law enforcement.
Yeah, and I think this is where we get that for people who do have some stigma about Customs and Border Patrol, who maybe look at that agency a little different, it might kind of stem from this period. Because even as a reporter, I remember a time when there would be stories that would come out about officers.
Yeah. So during this hiring surge, you saw the Border Patrol do exactly what every agency has to do. They cut hiring standards, they cut training standards, they cut oversight and supervision standards, because part of what it's not just about the new officers coming in, it's also that you end up having to promote existing officers sort of more quickly into supervisory roles than they should or they are experienced enough to do. And so to put sort of some specific numbers on this, from 2005 to 2012, more than 2,170 CBP officers and agents were arrested for misconduct and corruption. And to make that clear, from 2005 to 2012, one CBP officer or agent was arrested every single day for misconduct, crimes, or corruption. And as late as 2017, when I was still reporting on this, that arrest pace had only slowed to one officer or agent every 36 hours. Now, remember, this is
yikes.
This is a federal law enforcement agency. Like this, if anything, this should be sort of like less criminal than the average general population.
And this is not anecdata, right? Like this is not you being like, I've heard there were problems of corruption. No. It's like you could look up arrest on arrest. I don't know about all the convictions, but that's a lot of arrests.
I went to, I interviewed a CBP commissioner when I was writing about this for Politico, who told me on the record, we accidentally hired cartel members. Like they were just not doing the background vetting that they were supposed to. They weren't doing the background investigations that they were supposed to. They were not doing the training that they were supposed to. And then they were pushing these agents out into the field before they were ready. They actually hired a serial killer. There was a Border Patrol agent who was arrested for his serial murder, rape, kidnapping, and murder of women in Texas while he was a Border Patrol agent a few years ago. I mean, this is a wild level of criminality. And I think it's actually exactly what we're about to experience with ICE.
Let me pause here because you're giving this example of Customs and Border Patrol, which, by the way, at the end of all that, they hadn't solved the problem, so to speak, right? Which is why we're in the position we're in now. It didn't necessarily stop border crossings or reduce border crossings. Those numbers go up and down for all kinds of reasons. Walk me through how and why this happens, because you've given a couple examples. it's not just something like Customs Border Patrol, a big federal agency. It can happen with the police force. You mentioned Miami in the 80s. What are the steps that kind of lead us to those kinds of problems?
Yeah. So the challenge is just the volume, which is if, I'm picking sort of abstract numbers here, but if your goal this year is to hire 1,000 ICE officers, you're only going to take the 1,000 best applications you get this year. If your goal is to hire 10,000 ICE agents, you're going to hire 9,000 ICE officers who would have not made the cut this year.
Ooh, why do you think that? Let me stop, because I feel like there's going to be some ICE officers who hear that and are insulted. Help me understand that sentence.
ICE is going to get the volume of applications that it gets this year. Let's say it gets, again, I'm making these numbers up. Let's say it gets 50,000 applications this year. In a normal year, ICE might only hire, 1,000 new agents or officers to replace people who are retiring, people who are leaving early, sort of turn over the sort of normal number of slots. So of that, 40,000, 50,000 applications, you're only going to take that top 1,000 candidates. If your goal is to hire 10,000, you're going to take 9,000 applications that you literally would have turned down in a normal year, who are less qualified than the agents that you already would have selected this year. And
because there's pressure to move quickly also, right?
There's
the
pressure to
administration
move
wants
quickly.
to ramp this up, wants to spend the money.
Yep. And you're going to sort of see that ripple through the force because, again, there's going to be a whole bunch of existing officers in order to grow into that size who are going to be promoted into supervisory roles, who are more junior than they would have been promoted into those roles normally. They will be stretched sort of administrative capacity wise in terms of the oversight of the new agents and officers coming into the field. And you're also just not going to have the sort of robust culture teaching that you would have in a normal, more sedate and ordinary hiring period. I mean, so much of law enforcement is like any other new company or organization or institution that we're a part of, which is, you're sort of learning on the job, you're learning the culture, you're learning what's right, you're learning what's wrong. And when you're doing that with sort of supervisors and bosses who have not learned the ropes themselves, that's where you end up having incredible culture problems, which is part of what affected the Border Patrol during its hiring surge as well. That the agency aimed to have during its it's supposed to have an agent to supervisor ratio of 5-1. During the hiring surge, that fell in some places to as high as 11-1. So you had sort of the same number of supervisors supervising more than twice as many agents as they were supposed to. And by the end of the Bush administration, during the hiring surge, more than half of the Border Patrol had been in the Border Patrol for less than 2 years. Ooh. So that's something that I think we're going to see a lot of with ICE, where, let's say they're super successful with this hiring surge, in 2 years, 3 years from now, more than 2/3 of ICE officers will have only been an ICE officer for a year or two.
It's funny. I went to the ICE website to look at, the videos and things like that they might be putting out to draw people. And the one that caught my eye was not the one that was like images of people being arrested and put on planes, which also was there. But there was one person who was explaining, it's important for me to show that this job isn't all just like arresting people and taking them from their families. And it reminded me that even they know that that's what people think they do.
Yeah. And that, to me, actually is the thing that I most worry about with this hiring surge, which is we have never in American law enforcement, never in federal law enforcement, seen a hiring surge take place within an agency as polarizing and partisan as ICE is today. So, if you look at that post 9/11 hiring surge, we put a lot of new agents into the FBI. We put a lot of, we doubled the Border Patrol. There were huge ramp ups in, programs like the Air Marshals. But the hiring pitch for them, the recruitment pitch, was this deeply patriotic post 9/11, agree or disagree with it, whatever. But the pitch was, come be part of the first line of defense against terrorists. America,
for all of us, all Americans.
America was attacked. You are going to be part of the elite counterterrorism forces that protect American way of life. That is not the hiring pitch that ICE is splashing across the front pages and the TV channels of America right now. They are, the photos, the stories, the videos, it is, I think, to be very frank about it, a recruitment pitch for all of America's worst bullies. It is, are you excited to dress up like you are going to go take Fallujah in tactical gear with long guns and masks and then go raid a Home Depot parking lot? Are you interested in doing hand-to-hand combat in courthouse hallways with Democratic members of Congress? Are you excited to go, chase farm workers through fields, throwing tear gas canisters and flashbang grenades? This is, there's like, I think a level of sadism in the images that we are seeing out of ICE right now that are going to recruit exactly the wrong type of people to this job.
You're talking about recruitment. You're also describing news stories, right? So you're saying just the way it is depicted in public is the advertisement itself, is the thing that is going to help people decide, is this something I would want to do or not? And maybe help people who are more civil liberties minded, maybe make them feel like, well, maybe that's not the place for me.
Yeah. I mean, and by the way, I think that this is an explicit part of MAGA's hiring pitch. When you
so you think that ICE wants those images out there?
I mean, look at what DHS, look at what CBP, look at what ICE is posting to social media. They are posting these incredibly aggressive. Literally, they posted a skeleton meme the other day about mass deportations. Look at the photo ops they're doing of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, walking and laughing through alligator Alcatraz. As so many people have said about the Trump administration over the years, the cruelty is the point.
I think the defense from Tom Homan, who is the border czar and the person they put out frequently to talk about these things, is he has said, and to quote him, the rhetoric against the men and women of ICE is skyrocketing. We have senators and Congress people comparing ICE to Nazis. It's ridiculous. And he's also talked about this contributing to their kind of amped up approach, that they now have to be defensive or fearful while they're doing their jobs.
Yeah. And I think my answer would be ICE didn't have to do this up until 6 months ago. Up until 6 months ago, they were actually deporting more people than they are now. That the change has come because of who and where ICE is targeting. And this is, I think, an important part of the ICE story right now, which is, Stephen Miller went to ICE headquarters this spring and demanded that they get to 3,000 arrests a day. And that gives them sort of in round numbers about 1 million a year. And, we were talking earlier about how for most of its 20-year existence, ICE has focused on, again, oversimplifying this, the quote unquote actual criminals, that they've used prosecutorial discretion to go after the gang members, cartel members, etc. If you're trying to arrest 3,000 people a day, you have to go after America's grandmas. You have to round up people in Home Depot parking lots. You have to round up people at farms, because the work of going after the targeted sort of bad criminals just takes too long and takes
like
too
it's
many
easier
officers.
to go after someone who has, you're saying, a civil infraction and not the resources to run,
right?
Than a cartel member or someone who's made their life's work hiding from law enforcement.
Exactly.
You're saying it's just like, we should say in fairness, border apprehensions are down. Like those numbers are down. And so you have to look elsewhere to make those apprehensions.
Yes. And this is where, the main shift in ICE has come, is who they are going after. And,
and how they're doing it.
Right.
You were noting that even the FBI, like they have their jackets, and like there's ways that we identify law enforcement even when they're not in a uniform. And ICE is again shifting in its approach.
Yes. And America has no tradition of masked law enforcement outside of a couple of small and specific areas in, certain high profile SWAT raids or undercover drug operations. But, when the FBI shows up to raid your office or your house, they're not wearing masks, and they go out of their way to make clear that they're the FBI, wearing their big blue FBI raid jackets. ICE has gone in a totally different direction in these last 6 months. And, we're seeing them wear masks. And, part of the reason that, the Tom Homans of the world say, well, ICE needs to be masked now, is because what they're doing is so controversial that they are being sort of personally targeted and attacked. Which I think should tell you something about the public support for the work that they're doing. That no federal law enforcement agency in American history has ever done anything as unpopular with the public as what ICE is doing right now.
Which is saying something when you think about U.S. history.
I have covered the FBI for 20 years, and I can tell you,
even during desegregation, I don't know.
Again, the U.S. Marshals and FBI agents protecting civil rights marchers didn't feel that they needed to be masked. We associate masks in America with groups like the Ku Klux Klan. And I think, to be very frank, that ICE is trying to create a level of intimidation with its masked enforcement efforts that is more akin to what we would expect with a secret police in a totalitarian or authoritarian regime overseas.
And I should say right now, the way ICE is operating, one way or another, we're hearing about it through the court system. There have been challenges. And I know that, again, to quote Tom Homan, he was saying every ICE officer, they go through Fourth Amendment training every 6 months. They're reminded that what they can do, what they can't do when it comes to arrests or detention or questioning. He has gone out of his way to say, look, they are well trained. That's in the back of my mind in the course of this discussion as you're talking about what they're doing now and what the next class will be doing going forward.
Yeah, and I think part of what makes ICE different is It exists inside DHS rather than the Department of Justice. DHS is much less institutionally wedded to the Constitution and civil rights than the Department of Justice is. The DHS secretary is a policy position. It is not a law enforcement position in the way that the attorney general is.
And that position, theoretically, maybe not in the current configuration, keeps the White House at arm's length.
Yes.
At arm's length,
yes.
right? That says, like, we're here to enforce the law. We're not here to be kind of an arm of the government, so to speak.
Exactly. And then within sort of the architecture of border security and immigration enforcement, there's just a very different relationship to the courts system than what we are used to with, the FBI, ATF, DEA, Secret Service, Marshals. They rely on different standards of evidence. They are not as closely tied to Article III courts. They go through a separate immigration judge system that is...
And immigrants have a different set of rights.
And particularly within the border zone, where you have, this sort of weird gray area in America that extends 100 miles from any border, which by the time you factor in all of America's coastline, encompasses most of the places where most Americans live. And I think one of the things that, again, concerns me about this surge that we are seeing with ICE is this is going to bring ICE into contact with Americans in a way that we are unaccustomed to seeing federal law enforcement in our daily lives. The FBI, the Secret Service, DEA are very small agencies at the scale of the United States. And, most of us go all of our lives without having a professional interaction with FBI, Secret Service, ATF, DEA.
It's like it's all on TV, right?
This scale of what ICE is both hiring to do and then hopes to do numbers-wise is going to bring ICE into the interior of America in a way that we have never seen federal law enforcement be a daily presence in American lives and communities, sort of inside most of the United States. We are going to, quote unquote, get used to seeing ICE, at the 7-Eleven, seeing ICE at the Home Depot, seeing ICE, outside America's schools and churches and workplaces in a way that I think most Americans don't want federal law enforcement to be that present in our daily lives.
Yeah, and even in places that are not having a riotous response, right, like in LA, people are unnerved by it. And the reason why I say this is because, like, if I'm on Reddit or social media or something, inevitably on the feed, there is a video someone has sort of surreptitiously taken of something they believe is an ICE raid or an ICE arrest or a detention in their neighborhood, in a parking lot. People are kind of filming it because they're like, can you believe this is happening?
Yes.
Or they think something's not quite right and they have to kind of get it on the record. And, in the last few years with Black Lives Matters, et cetera, there's been this sense that if you film law enforcement while they're doing things, that may come in handy later if you have to compare descriptions of the incident. But I bring it up because it speaks to that sense of people being like, what is this?
Yeah.
Is this how this is supposed to go?
And I think we're going to feel it in the way that a lot of Americans have to go about their lives, which is, already at the sort of tiny scale that ICE is doing this across the country today, at a quarter or a third of what ICE will be doing, they hope, in a year or 2 years from now. We're seeing U.S. citizens get roughed up. We're seeing U.S. citizens, accidentally end up in these detention facilities. We're seeing U.S. citizens accidentally get, kidnapped and disappeared overseas. And America has never been a country where you have to carry your papers with you. When we think about like the sort of state police coming up to you on the street and saying, papers, please. We think of Nazi Germany. We think of fascist Italy. We think of, Soviet era East Germany or, Iron Curtain era. And, you're not supposed to, as an American right now, have to carry your passport and your birth certificate with you to go to the grocery store. And yet, I think we're very rapidly moving towards a country where at least a lot of people who don't look sort of as blazingly white as I do are going to have to be proving themselves as Americans to law enforcement officers sort of anytime they leave their house, which is a just terrifying difference in sort of the day-to-day culture of American street life.
This isn't a question that will have like a factual answer, but I kind of want to ask it just because you've been following these issues for a long time, which is that once there is a problem that needs to be fixed, my experience is that it never quite gets fixed enough to draw down, right? Like the war on terror is never really over. The war on drugs is never really over. It seems like I don't know, I have this sense that you don't ever dial back after you ramp up.
I would go one step further and say America does a terrible job going to war on nouns. The war on poverty, the war on drugs, the war on terror. These are things that sort of just don't end up ever defeating the thing that they're actually trying to defeat. And so
while still creating infrastructure and apparatus and spending to defeat it.
And so America going to war on immigration, which is exactly what we are doing right now. We are spending military invasion levels amounts of money on immigration in these next couple of years, is going to have a host of negative downstream consequences that we will probably never be able to undo.
Despite you being the author of a newsletter called The Doomsday Scenario, I'm going to ask you to also reach into the history and tell me what happens when places do find a way to rise up out of those corrupt practices. So I don't talk about the Washington, D.C. police department the way people did back then, or Miami. Like, what happens for an agency to right itself, so to speak, to become healthy law enforcement?
Well, I'll give you an unfortunate example, which is one of the things that America realized after 9/11 was how broken and incompetent and culturally bereft Immigration and Naturalization Services was, INS was.
INS, you're taking it back.
And what we did was we broke it apart and created ICE. ICE is in some ways the Band-Aid for the last time our immigration enforcement efforts broke down. And I think in a very weird way, what ICE is doing to itself right now, in terms of the level of aggression and I think sort of misconduct that we are seeing on display in America's streets on a daily basis right now, means that abolishing ICE is going to become the moderate position of, anyone hoping to dig us out of, where the Trump administration leaves us in the next couple of years.
Though right now, I've only heard that as considered a political third rail, that the last time, let's say, Democrats started to even start talking about abolish ICE, to this day, it haunts them, even in this moment. And I'm wondering if it hampers their ability to have some meaningful discussion about what's going on.
No, because I think what we're watching ICE do day by day in America right now is radicalize a whole bunch of Americans who didn't care about immigration enforcement 6 months ago. And, you know, you are watching a agency that I believe is acting like it will never be accountable again. You know, one of the things that we've seen ICE do this spring is, you know, actually wrestle with Democratic members of Congress who are trying to inspect ICE facilities, which they have a legal ability to do. It is illegal for ICE to interfere with Democratic or Republican members of Congress who want to show up at any detention facility anywhere in the country and go inside. It is a literal line in federal law that says members of Congress can show up at any ICE facility at any time and inspect it. And ICE has actually ended up in shoving matches that have resulted in criminal charges against Democratic members of Congress for, for assaulting ICE officers who were illegally stopping them from doing their jobs. And that's an agency, Audie, that is operating as if it will never be accountable to Democratic members of Congress again. You know, if you have a healthy agency, you are saying to yourself, okay, Democrats aren't in charge right now. They might be a year from now, or 18 months from now. And at that point, I don't want them to think that they have to abolish me as an agency. And the fact that ICE does not act like that really terrifies me.
Because they feel they have the wind at their back and support from the Trump administration. But are there other aspects of it, again, their history or just how they've been operating, that you think they're not seeing that there could be backlash?
Yeah.
Or I guess maybe they just think the backlash is political. I don't know. I'm trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, I think it actually comes back to this question of them being a young agency, which is if you are part of the FBI, if you are part of the Secret Service, if you're part of the ATF, if you're in a supervisory or leadership capacity there, you have lived through the cycles of the political pendulum. You know, you have lived through moments where sort of America's pendulum swings more towards security and back towards it swings more towards freedom. And personal liberty. You have lived through moments where your agency has been dragged in front of congressional oversight hearings. You know, you have lived through eras when officials or directors have been forced to resign because of scandals. ICE just doesn't have that yet because they're still a young agency. And so, you know, when you look at the people who are the leaders of ICE today, I think part of their blinders come from the fact that ICE just hasn't been part of this pendulum swing in the past before, that they sort of feel unleashed in American society right now. You know, we can take the gloves off, you know, we can beat up any grandma in any Home Depot parking lot that we want across the country right now, and no one can stop us. And they just don't have that sort of shadow of the future that comes from being a more seasoned and veteran law enforcement agency that's like, you know what, we might get away with this today, but it's not going to look good tomorrow when someone else is in charge, and I don't want to throw my career over. I don't want to throw my career away over this today.
And in the meantime, for the people in the public, they're becoming more and more uncomfortable.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Garrett, thank you so much for speaking with us. I appreciate it.
Anytime.